Do me a favor, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment if something resonates, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. Now, I never would have guessed that a neighbor doing something nice for me would flip the way I looked at the world. At 44, I figured I had life pretty much mapped out. Work during the day, home in the evening, maybe a glass of wine out on the porch while the world passed me by. I was more of an observer than a participant. Life had settled into this steady rhythm. Just one responsibility after another. Nothing surprising. Nothing new. The spark had gone quiet. That is, until Elias, my next-door neighbor, stepped into my life in a way I never expected. He had lived on my street for about 5 years. Kind of guy who kept to himself. Early 50s, always neat, always respectful, but never one to start a conversation, unless you did. We exchanged those neighborly greetings now and then, quick talks about the weather or the trash pickup schedule, nothing more. He was polite, dependable, and quiet. That was about all I knew. I did know he worked in construction. He was out early, home late, and he had this big old dog named Bear who loved attention from anyone willing to scratch behind his ears. Our street wasn't exactly social. Folks liked their space. You could live next to someone for a decade and still not know what they did for a living, and honestly, that suited me just fine. I wasn't looking for deep bonds or backyard barbecues. At least I didn't think I was. Then came that chilly autumn night. I had just gotten back from a long day at work, my brain fried and my shoulders tight with stress. The air smelled like burning firewood, and I could hear the crunch of dried leaves under my boots as I walked up the driveway. I noticed the porch light was still flickering. It had been doing that for days, but I kept putting it off like I did with most home repairs. I was juggling my work bag and digging for my keys when I heard a voice call out from behind me. "Hey, looks like you could use a hand." I turned around and there was Elias, standing right at the edge of my yard. He had his hands stuffed into the pockets of a worn jacket, his eyes dark but kind. There was this cautious warmth to him. I gave a tired smile. "Yeah, just one of those end-of-the-day messes, you know?" He nodded. "I've seen your porch light acting up. Want me to take a look?" At first, I froze. It seemed like such a simple offer, but the idea of letting someone, especially someone I barely knew, into my space felt weird. I'd been doing things on my own for so long that accepting help almost felt like a defeat. But then again, there was something in his face. Something that made me want to say yes. "That'd actually be really nice," I said, almost surprised to hear myself admit it. Elias walked over, pulled a little tool out of his coat pocket, and got to work without missing a beat. While he fiddled with the light fixture, we started talking. Nothing deep, just work stuff, basic life stuff. He shared that he used to work on old houses, but nowadays he stuck to commercial jobs. I told him I worked at a publishing company, buried in books and deadlines most days. "There," he said after a few minutes, stepping back. The porch light flickered once, then came on steady, warm and bright. "That was fast," I said, genuinely impressed. I probably would have wasted half the night watching do-it-yourself videos before giving up. He chuckled, a low and easy sound. "Loose connections. Happens more than you'd think." I thanked him, figuring he'd head back to his place. But instead, he leaned against the porch railing like he wasn't quite ready to go. "Funny thing," he said after a pause. "When I first moved in, I figured this place was just a pit stop. Didn't expect to stay long." I tilted my head. "And now?" Elias let out a breath, visible in the cold air. "Now? I don't know. Some places just grow on you." Something about that stuck with me. Not just the words, but the way he said it. Soft, thoughtful, like he wasn't just talking about a neighborhood. That night after I went inside, I caught myself glancing over at his house through the blinds. It made me realize how little I really knew about the folks living around me. Over the next few weeks, we bumped into each other more often. At first, it was just a wave or a quick hello. Then came the small conversations. How's work? How's Bear? That kind of thing. But eventually, one evening, it became something else. It had been one of those terrible days at the office. Everything went wrong, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, I was running on fumes. All I wanted was to shut the door behind me and be left alone. But there he was, Elias, leaning against his truck with Bear sitting loyally by his side, tail wagging. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice gentle but steady. He looked at me with that quiet kind of understanding, the kind that made you feel seen without having to explain a thing. I sighed. "Yeah, you could say that. Come on," he said, giving a slight nod toward his place. "You need a break." I stood there for a second, unsure, then found myself following him without saying a word. His house was warmer than I expected, not just in temperature, but in feel. There was this soft scent in the air, something like cedar wood mixed with a hint of spice. It wrapped around me the second I stepped through the door. Without asking, Elias handed me a glass of wine like he already knew it had been one of those days. I took it with a quiet nod, sinking into the couch beside him. Bear laid his head on my knee like we were already old friends, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let my shoulders drop. I let myself breathe. We talked about nothing important and everything that mattered. Childhood stories, missed chances, things we wished we had done differently. He just listened. Really listened. No interruptions. No judgment. Just that calm, steady presence that somehow made it easy to talk. Time moved without us noticing. And at some point, while the night stretched on, something shifted between us. It was not some big, dramatic moment, no grand confessions or anything like that. It was just this quiet warmth that settled between us, like the kindling of a fire you didn't realize had been lit. Eventually, I leaned back, letting the weight of the day melt off me. Elias didn't speak. He did not try to fill the silence. Instead, he reached over and gently placed his hand over mine. No pressure. No expectations. Just something steady to hold on to. "You're not alone, you know," he said softly. And right then, for the first time in a long while, I actually believed that. Later that night, walking back across the lawn to my house, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the big, sweeping kind. Just a little flicker. I didn't know if anything more would come from what happened that evening. I didn't even know if it needed to, but what I did know without a doubt was that Elias had done something real for me that night. He saw me, and that, right there, changed everything. The days that followed felt different somehow. Not just because of the brief chats or passing waves between us. It was something else entirely. Like the space between our houses had been rewired. Quiet, but charged with this new understanding. I kept telling myself it was probably nothing, just two neighbors being kind to one another. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder, was it the start of something more? I had always taken pride in being self-reliant, the kind of person who handled life on their own without asking for anything. But sitting at my kitchen table one morning, coffee mug in hand, I caught myself thinking about Elias in a way that went beyond neighborly appreciation. It wasn't just the help with the porch light or the wine he poured without asking. It was the way he looked at me, like he could see past the polite smiles and busy routine. Like he understood the exhaustion I didn't even know how to explain. And the thing is, he never tried to fix me, he just gave me space to be myself. Still, I didn't quite know what to make of it all. Was this just a kind of quiet friendship? Or was there something more sitting just under the surface? That question hung in the back of my mind until the following Saturday. I had finally gotten around to cleaning out the garage, a job I'd been avoiding for way too long, when I heard a knock on the door. Wiping the dust from my hands, I opened it to find Elias standing there with Bear sitting beside him, tail wagging like usual. "Got a minute?" he asked casually, though something in his eyes felt more serious. "Sure," I said, stepping back to let him in. He made himself at home like it was second nature, and before long he started talking about some plans he had for the weekend. He wanted to go hiking in the mountains nearby, said he thought it would be nice to have some company. I blinked at him. "You want me to go hiking? I don't even own a pair of boots." He laughed, low and warm. "It's not a long hike. Just a few hours, nothing serious. I must have still looked skeptical because he added, "It's not about the boots. It's about stepping out for a bit, clearing your head. I think you could use it." I paused. Hiking wasn't exactly my thing. The idea of trudging through the woods for hours sounded exhausting. But then I looked at him, and something about the way he said it, the way he looked at me like I needed this, not just wanted it, made me nod. "Okay," I said, "but don't expect me to keep up." He gave me that quiet smile of his, the one that made you feel like he already understood exactly where you were coming from. Deal. The next morning we met just after sunrise. The air was sharp and cold, each breath visible like little clouds in front of us. We started down the trail, the crunch of fallen leaves beneath our feet, the trees glowing in those deep gold and amber colors only fall can give you. The world felt still, quiet in a way that settled something inside me. And with every step, I felt like I was walking further away from the person I had been, and a little closer to whoever I might be becoming. It was beautiful. Peaceful in a way I had not felt in a long, long time. Something about that trail, the fresh air, the trees swaying overhead, it just quieted everything inside me. The stress I had been carrying around like an old backpack started to loosen with every step. I did not even realize how heavy it had gotten until I felt it start to lift. Elias never hurried me. He didn't push or pace ahead like some folks might. He just walked right alongside me, steady and calm. Bear, his dog, was a few paces ahead, full of energy, but always circling back to check on us like he was keeping us on track. It was comforting. In a quiet, simple way, we talked. About life, mostly. Not the usual surface stuff either. Real things. Stuff we had never really spoken about with anyone, let alone each other. I did not even know I had those words in me until they started coming out. There was something easy about being around him. No pressure, no need to explain myself. And in the middle of all that, I caught a glimpse of a part of myself I had not seen in years. The part that used to laugh just because, the part that could be present in the moment without overthinking everything. That part of me was still in there, just buried deep. About halfway through the trail, we came to a clearing, the kind of spot that makes you stop whether you want to or not. It opened up to this wide view of the valley below, with the sun slipping through the trees in golden streaks. It looked like something off a postcard. We sat on this big flat rock, Bear flopped down at our feet, and everything just paused. "This used to be my spot," Elias said, breaking the quiet. "Back when I first moved here, I'd hike up just to be alone. Didn't know anyone yet. I needed the space." I looked over at him. He was staring out at the valley, his voice softer than usual. "But somewhere along the way," he went on, "I figured out I did not want to be alone anymore." I was not expecting that. I turned toward him, surprised by how open he was being. "I didn't know that about you," I said, my voice almost a whisper. He gave a little shrug, smiling with this mix of sadness and something else. "Hope, maybe." "I don't really talk about it much," he said. "But I guess sometimes it's worth letting people in, even if it's just a little." I nodded, letting his words settle. They hit me harder than I thought they would. I had spent so much time keeping people out, telling myself I was fine on my own, that I was safer that way. But sitting there beside him, with the wind brushing through the trees and that view stretched out in front of us, I realized I had been wrong. Elias was not just easy to be around, he made everything feel lighter, less heavy, like I was not dragging all the pieces of my life behind me. And for the first time in years, I felt something start to pull at me, a sense of connection, real and honest. By the time we made it back to our cars, the sky had started to shift. The sun was low, dipping beneath the hills, painting everything in that last bit of orange light. I felt something in my chest, gratitude, not just for the hike but for Elias himself, for what he gave me without even trying. On the drive home, we rode in quiet, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that made space for thought. When we pulled into my driveway, I turned to him. I felt this small smile tug at my mouth before I even knew it was there. "Thanks for today," I said, softer than I usually speak. He looked at me, eyes steady. "Anytime," he replied. "You're not alone, remember that." And something clicked inside me, just like that. All those emotional walls I had built over the years, they didn't feel so solid anymore. For once, being vulnerable didn't scare me. It felt right. The days after that hike flew by. I slipped back into my usual routine. Work, chores, the same old rhythm. But something inside me had changed. I found myself thinking about Elias more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just about how kind he was or how calm he made me feel. It was how he saw me. The real me. The me I didn't show most people. He had this quiet way of peeling back the layers, not with questions, but just by being. It was like he could sense what I was thinking without me having to say it out loud. And that scared me a little, because I had been hurt before. Part of me wanted to keep my guard up, to keep things safe. But another part? That part wanted more. Wanted him, then, about a week after the hike, on a regular Wednesday afternoon, I was wrapping up a long day working from home. My laptop was still open on the kitchen counter when I heard a knock at the front door. I hesitated for a second before heading over. There he was, Elias, standing there with Bear by his side again. But this time, he was holding a small brown paper bag. "I brought you something," he said, lifting the bag a little. "Fresh cookies." His voice was light when he spoke, casual on the surface. But there was something else beneath it, something deeper hiding in his eyes. "Figured you could use a little treat." I let out a laugh, caught off guard but genuinely touched. "You didn't have to do that, Elias," I said, already reaching for the bag. "But I won't turn down cookies." He smiled then, that quiet, familiar smile of his that somehow managed to reach all the way through me. My heart skipped without warning. I didn't want you to feel like you were alone," he said. "I've been thinking about you. You carry a lot on your shoulders, and you don't really let anyone see it. But it's okay to let go sometimes. It's okay to let people in." Something about his words hit hard. It was like he'd been looking straight through me, right past all the armor I'd built up over the years. I tried to respond, but nothing came out. My throat tightened, and all I could do was nod. Elias stepped inside, taking his time like he wasn't in a rush. "I just wanted to check in," he said gently. "Make sure you're doing okay. I know life's thrown some stuff your way lately." There it was again, that simple, subtle kindness. The way he saw me, not as just a neighbor, but as someone worth noticing. It shook something loose inside me. I wasn't used to this kind of attention, this steady care. It felt like standing at the edge of something, torn between stepping back or leaning in. I led him into the kitchen and set a kettle on the stove. We sipped hot tea in the quiet, the soft clinking of mugs grounding us in a moment that somehow felt more intimate than it should have. The cookies sat in a small bowl between us, and when I reached for one, my fingers brushed his. Just for a second. I pulled my hand back quickly, not sure if it had meant anything, or if I'd just imagined the jolt of warmth that shot through me. Trying to shake off the nerves, I said, "So what's going on in your world? Got any exciting plans this weekend?" Elias chuckled and eased back into the kitchen chair. "Actually, yeah. I've been thinking about doing some more hiking. There's this one spot I've been meaning to check out, up near the old creek. Heard it's got a great view." Just hearing him mention the creek stirred up something I hadn't thought about in years. My childhood came flooding back, wandering the woods with friends, making up stories, pretending we were off on some great adventure. I hadn't realized how far I'd drifted from that part of myself. "That sounds beautiful," I said, smiling a little without meaning to. "Maybe I'll come with you. I could use a break from my head." His eyes lit up, just for a second. Like he hadn't expected me to say that. "You're welcome anytime," he said softly, his voice dipping into something almost uncertain. I'd really like to share it with you, but if you're not up for it, that's okay too." He said it gently, carefully, like he was testing the waters, not wanting to push too hard. That's when it really hit me. It was never about the cookies, or the hike, or even the tea. It was about the space he was offering me. Safe, open, patient, a place where I could just be. "I'll go," I said, the words slipping out before I could second-guess them. "Let's do it. I need the fresh air. I need to clear my head." The weekend showed up quicker than I expected, and I could not tell if I was more nervous about the hike or everything quietly growing between us. That morning was crisp, the kind of early chill that wakes you up before you're ready. I stepped outside and there he was, Elias, leaning against his car like he had all the time in the world. Bear was sitting beside him, alert and happy. "You ready?" he asked, his gaze meeting mine with that steady, unreadable look. The kind that made me feel both seen and like there was more he wasn't saying. I nodded and forced a little smile. "Yeah, let's go." The drive to the trailhead was easy. Light conversation, nothing too deep. But underneath it all, there was a tension neither of us dared to name. Exciting, and a little terrifying. Once we started walking, though, all that noise in my head started to quiet again. The trail curled along the creek, and everything around us seemed to slow. Leaves rustled gently above, birds called out in the distance, and the steady sound of the water flowing over smooth rocks carried through the trees, like a song only we could hear. We reached a clearing near the creek and found a wide, flat stone to sit on. The water moved slow and clear just a few feet away, and I let myself relax into the stillness of it all. Bear darted ahead, chasing after a stick Elias had tossed into the brush. The dog's tail wagged like crazy, full of life and joy, but Elias and I stayed where we were, side by side, just taking in the view in silence. "This place," I said quietly, my eyes scanning the slow-moving creek and the sun-dappled trees. "It's peaceful. I didn't realize how much I needed this." Elias turned to look at me, his gaze soft and steady. "I'm glad you came," he said. "You don't have to carry it all by yourself, you know." Those words landed harder than I expected. I had been carrying so much for so long, stress, doubt, grief, pressure, all of it tucked away inside. And somehow, this man standing beside me saw it without me saying a word. It was a lot to take in. His kindness, his quiet way of showing up. The way he offered to shoulder just a bit of my load without making a big deal out of it. I felt my throat tighten. Not with sadness, exactly. Just that strange feeling when someone gets too close to the truth you've tried to hide. We sat there on that big flat rock, saying nothing for a long while. But the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full of everything we didn't have to say out loud. And it hit me then, real clear. I wasn't alone anymore. And maybe I didn't have to be. After that hike, something shifted. It wasn't just the scenery or the fresh air that stayed with me. It was the feeling. That quiet connection, that sense of finally being understood. Elias and I didn't need constant conversation or grand gestures. Just being around him made me feel grounded, present, like I could actually exhale and stay still for once. The next weekend, without planning it or overthinking it, I found myself walking toward his house. I'd been stuck in my own head all week, turning over questions about what I wanted, where I was going, and where Elias fit into all of that. I still didn't have the answers. But for once, that uncertainty didn't scare me. I reached his porch and paused. Just for a second, then I knocked. He opened the door almost right away, like he'd been waiting for me. "Hey there," he said, flashing that warm, familiar smile. "Come on in. I just put on a pot of coffee." I stepped inside, and the smell hit me instantly. Fresh coffee, the kind that wraps around you like a blanket on a cold day. The place was quiet, calm, peaceful, just like him. We sat down at his kitchen table, steam rising from the mugs in front of us, and before I knew it, we were talking again. Easy, unforced, like we'd been doing it for years. But this time, there was something else in the air. Something deeper. Elias looked over at me, his eyes thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day," he started. "About carrying everything on your own. I know you've had your share of hard times. I just want you to know, I'm here. I don't want to push you, and I'm not trying to fix anything. But you don't have to go through it all alone." His words stopped me cold. Not because they scared me, but because they were exactly what I needed to hear. I had spent years convincing myself I could handle everything. That, depending on someone else, would only lead to disappointment or heartache. But right then, sitting across from him, I realized how much I'd been missing. I looked down at my mug, then back up at him. "I don't want to be alone either," I said, my voice quieter than usual but steady. "I think I've been afraid to trust people, to open up. But I'm tired of doing this by myself. And the truth is, I trust you, Elias." He smiled. Not that big, showy kind. Just a small, gentle one that said everything without needing words. "You don't have to say anything more if you're not ready," he replied. "I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, I felt it. That heavy weight I'd been carrying around for years, it finally started to lift. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself breathe, and it was okay. Actually, it was better than okay. It felt like a new beginning. The next few weeks passed in a blur of soft, simple moments. We spent more time together, going on walks, cooking meals, laughing over silly things. Nothing flashy, just two people learning each other's rhythm. But the real shift wasn't in what we did. It was in how we did it. No pressure, no assumptions, just space and understanding. One evening, right as the sun was sinking low and the sky outside turned that perfect kind of gold, we sat out back on his porch. The world felt still, painted in soft light. Elias looked over at me with a smile that was both playful and full of something real. "So," he said, eyes holding mine, "do you think you're ready for the next step?" I didn't quite know what he meant at first, but I could feel in my gut that the question mattered. It wasn't just casual. There was weight behind it. I looked over at him, his eyes warm, calm, waiting. And somehow the warmth in his gaze matched what I felt stirring inside my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice a little unsteady, not from fear, but something else. Anticipation, maybe. Elias took a slow breath, like he wanted to make sure he said it right. "I mean us," he said. "I know we've taken our time, and I've been fine with that. But I think we both feel it. There's something real here. And I think it's worth seeing where it goes." My heart skipped a beat, literally. And then came that flutter in my stomach, the kind I hadn't felt in years. The idea of letting someone in, fully, without walls or excuses, it scared the hell out of me. But it also lit something inside me. "I'm scared," I said honestly, barely louder than a whisper. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I think I want to try." His smile softened into something real, something steady, and that's when I realized it didn't matter if I had everything figured out. It didn't matter if I was fully ready. What mattered was that I was not doing it alone anymore. That was enough. "I'm scared," I repeated, this time with a little more strength behind it. "But I'm here." In the months that followed, we built something good, something real. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. We had our awkward moments, our doubts. I had nights where I second-guessed myself, wondering if I was doing the right thing. But Elias never wavered. He stood beside me, steady as ever, reminding me with every quiet gesture that I didn't have to carry everything by myself anymore. Little by little, I started to trust. Not just him, but myself. I let my guard down. I opened up. And I found that there was something beautiful waiting on the other side of that fear. Looking back now, it almost feels unreal. How much has changed, how much I've changed, how far we've come. It's strange, isn't it? How something so simple, something as small as a neighbor offering to fix a flickering porch light, can turn your life in a whole new direction. Something you never planned for, something you didn't even know you needed. But if there's one thing I've come to understand, it's this. Sometimes the best things in life aren't the ones we chase. They're the ones that find us. The unexpected moments, the quiet gestures, the people who show up when you least expect them and change everything. Maybe that's what life's really about. Thanks for sticking with me through this story. I hope it meant something to you, the way it's meant something to me. And hey, who knows? Maybe your own quiet, unexpected moment is just around the corner. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.